Hey everyone! Today we're going to go through the performance assembly guide found in the very beginning of Luke Hatfield's help guide. It incorporates several of the fixes that Luke himself has come up with while helping us with our Ender 3s. If you use this video, it'll give you a better performing and more stable 3D printer right out of the box. That means more time printing and less time going back to fix things. I'd like to give a huge shout out to Luke himself for letting me film these videos, and also thanks so much to Creality for sending me this Ender 3 specifically to film this assembly video. My name's Jim, and this is The Edge of Tech. So I wanted to start the video off by showing you what was in the box as soon as you open it. So you're going to find this top padding, and we're going to go ahead and set it over here to the side. So right away when you open the box, you should see that the manual is sitting right on top of the build surface and everything's packed very nicely. So if we look at that manual again real quick, it's version 3.5, so they have been updating the manual, which is really awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and tip the box up for you and show you a little bit more of what's in here. So right away you can see the extrusions here. You can see the build surface, the bed, and the main frame of the printer right here. That's a big piece. The power supply right here, and everything else is packed pretty tight, and we'll start unboxing that here in a second. But I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what was inside when you first opened the box. So I started taking everything out, and I just wanted to show you there is 2 layers. So once you get everything out of the first layer, go ahead and throw it aside. And just a quick show you, there is more underneath, so don't forget. Okay, so let's go over some of the things that came in the box quickly. This is your frame and your bed, and this right here is your hot end. So when you're taking it out of the packaging, be careful because the hot end is attached wiring-wise to the frame and the bed. We'll go over that in a little while. This is your power supply. This is your stepper motor for your Z-rod. We have the Gantry trolleys, and this one has your extruder on it. We have extrusions. We have the big extrusions over here. And something to note, inside of one of them is your Z-rod, and it has a cover on it. So when you're taking these out of the box, this can easily just slip out, but that's where your Z-rod is hiding. It's inside of one of the big extrusions. I'm going to keep it in there now for safekeeping, and we'll get back to that in a little while. On the far side, you have your filament holder right there. And then we have some packages, and we're going to go over the packages now. All right, in the first package I opened, we have the sample roll of filament. We have the micro SD card to USB adapter. We have the micro SD card itself. We have the Z end stop, which is right here. We also have the belt tensioner for the Gantry with a pulley on it right here, and we're going to install that in a little while. We have the Bowden couplers, and they did give us an extra one, which is awesome, and an extra nozzle. And we also got the coupler lock clips as well, which is great. And don't forget, we did get a acupuncture needle, and what that's used for is cleaning out your nozzle later. Okay, what came in the second bag that I opened was zip ties. We have all of our screws that we're going to be using, and they're all individually labeled with Chinese and English, which is awesome. We have the filament spool holder nut. They call it a rack pipe nut. So we have a belt. We have our flush cut pliers. We have the hex or Allen keys. These are actually ball socket hex keys. So one side has a little ball on it. We'll show you that later. We have our wrenches, our spanner wrenches, and one is an open end wrench for nozzles and other stuff in here. We have a small little flathead screwdriver. Some other things I didn't mention yet. We do have a scraper or a spatula that came with it. And of course, the power cord that came with it as well. So last but not least, we have our manual that came with it as well. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to adjust the Y-axis. My Ender 3, straight out of the box here, came with very little bed wobble, but some of them actually come with quite a bit. So what we're going to do is, first I'm just going to take the clips off of the bed, like that. These are the bed clips. That's going to be used to hold your surface, your build surface on. So I'm going to remove that for now. Okay, what I've done is I spun the printer around and I've gone ahead and set everything in the back. So you can tell it's the back because the Y stepper motor is in the back of the machine, and that's right here. So put that facing in the back of the machine, and the other side is the front. And then what we're going to do is position the camera a little different and go ahead and set our machine up on its side so the rear is to the right. These two here are your eccentric nuts on the Y carriage here. So what we're going to do is take the open-ended wrench that came with the kit. We're going to go in here and we're just going to go ahead and loosen them just a little bit each. So now my bed is wobbling. You see that? These were very tight from the factory, and we want to make sure this thing's rolling very smooth. So our bed is wobbling now as we loosen them. So what we want to do now is just take the first one and tighten it just by small increments until our bed doesn't wobble anymore. Then we want to go to the second one and do the same thing. Just enough so the bed stops wobbling. But what you want is, so when it's very tight, you notice no more bed wobble. And you want this to roll very smoothly, like this. You shouldn't feel any little bumps or anything like that, and you will feel it when you roll it back and forth. The other thing is, when you hold the bed with your finger, you should be able to hold this and still a little bit twist these wheels, just a little bit. Now once we're done adjusting the eccentric nuts for the carriage, you got to flip your printer back over with the back end facing the rear. Then you should have a nice smooth carriage, and you should not have any bed wobble here. If you feel any wobble in your bed, if it's moving any more than what the springs would allow it to move, then you need to go back and readjust your eccentric nuts for the Y carriage. Okay, let's move on to step number 1 in Luke's performance assembly guide. So what we got is we need the 2 larger extrusions, and we need the base, and we need the Allen wrench and 4 M5 by 45 millimeter bolts. So what we're going to do is point out that this one is the right side. How you can tell it's the right side, it'll have 2 holes here, and you want to use the hole that's closer to the bottom, towards the bottom of the base, okay? The other extrusion, don't forget, inside of this is going to be your Z-screw or your Z-rod. And that is just a protective case. So we're going to take that all out, and inside of there is your Z-rod, see? So we're going to go ahead and set that over to the side. And how you can tell this is the left is it'll have 2 holes here, and it'll be closer to the bottom. That's how we're going to put it in. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and turn our base up and put on our left extrusion, and then we'll work on the right one. So you'll take a bolt on each, so 2 bolts each. You're going to push them up through the bottom and screw on the extrusion from the top. So I like to do this on the side. So it's going to line up something about like that when we're ready. So you just want to take your bolts, push it from the back and tighten it in, and then we'll go over the next steps in a second. So I just wanted to point this out. These are the 2 bolts that we're pushing in, okay? I was having a little bit of trouble holding the extrusion and then pushing the bolt in with my finger and turning it. So what I did was I used the rounded side of our hex key or our Allen wrench. I put it in here, and that could do some pressure, and then I was able to screw and tighten that bolt in from the back like that. So just a quick tip, you might be able to hold your bolt in with your hex key here, and that way when you're holding your extrusion, you can actually turn and tighten it in. So the next steps to do the right side extrusion. We have the extrusion here. What we want to do is make sure that your holes are on the left side of the extrusion like this, and that hole is closer to the bottom. If you have it upside down, this hole here will be pretty far up the top here. So make sure you're putting it on with that hole closer to the bottom. So it's very important that these are not fully tightened down right now. As you can tell, with some medium pressure, I can twist these and they still rotate a little bit. We're going to go over why a little bit further down in the instructions, but you want to make sure that these are both able to rotate a little bit in here and they're not fully tightened down yet. Okay, let's move on to step number 2. And what we need for step number 2 is 2 M5x8 bolts and 2 M4x20 bolts. We need the screen and control panel, and we need the power supply. We're going to go ahead and do the power supply first. So the first thing we want to do with the power supply is we want to flip it over, and there's a little switch right here, this little red switch. If you're in the US, you want to push it down. Make sure it says 115 here. If you are outside of the US and you use the 230, it'll be up and it'll say 230. So then what we're going to do is turn the power supply around, and I like to set it here just for a second while I grab my screws. So these are the 2 M4x20 screws, and what I like to do is take your Allen wrench, your hex key, put it on there. I like to push it through and just see the other side so I can get that top one started. So that top one is now started. I'll do the same thing for the bottom. I'm just going to push it through and watch it so it gets on there. And then I'm just going to use the long side here, and I'm going to snug it down just till about tight, but no further. Just like that. Okay, so now we got our power supply on. These 2 bolts are holding it. So we're going to take our Allen wrench and our 2 smaller bolts and the control screen, and we're going to get those on. First thing I want to do is move this a little bit closer to the edge of the table. It'll make it a lot easier to screw these 2 screws in if your Allen wrench isn't hitting that table. Also, we're going to take our ribbon cable and we're going to plug it into the back of the screen right away. And we're going to do that in the third, so all the way to the left side if you're looking at it. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Then our screen will sit up just like this. So we're going to take our smaller screws and we're going to go ahead and get our screen put on with the smaller screws. So take your Allen wrench. You can kind of hold it and get the first one in. Take your Allen wrench here and get the second one started. And once they're both started, they go in pretty quick. So once you get your 2 bolts in, use the small side and you can just get those snug, maybe a quarter or half turn past tight. And that concludes step 2. We're going to move on to step 3. Actually, we're going to move on to step 5 in Luke's guide, because in steps 3 and 4, they work on the X gantry, and we're going to come back to that. So for step 5, what we need is the left trolley, and this is the left trolley right here. You can tell it's the left trolley because it has the extruder on it. We need a Bowden coupler. We need 2 of the M4x16 bolts here. We're just going to use 2. And then we need the larger of the 2 extrusions that are left. And I'm going to show you that now. You can tell it's the larger one, like this. There we go. So we need the larger of the 2. Perfect. And then what we need is we're going to start by putting the Bowden coupler into the extruder, just like this. So we're going to screw it in finger tight, and this is your extruder. So we're going to screw it in there finger tight, and then we're going to come back and grab the wrench that came with the kit, and we're just going to tighten it in about a half turn tight. Oop, wrong side. There we go. About a half turn tight. Perfect. So now that you got the Bowden coupler on, what we need to do is go ahead and put the extrusion onto the left trolley. So what you're going to do is pick up your left trolley and pick up your extrusion. And I just want to point out on the left side of the extrusion, you're going to see 3 holes that are close together and this big hole right there. And that's the way you want to orientate the extrusion when you put it on. So that big hole is actually going to go over, let me set it down, this bolt right here that's already existing. So when you place this on, you're going to take 2 of your M4x16 bolts and this is just going to get screwed down. So you'll take this and you'll flip it over. There's the big hole there, and hold it just like that. And I found it's easier to actually turn it over and work with it on the bottom. Then what you can do is take one of your M4x16 bolts and you can actually, if I can get it there, set it in here with your fingers and get it started with your fingers. I know that's a small space, but get it started with your fingers like that. And then grab your Allen wrench and you can go down through the top hole and get it snug. You don't want to tighten at this time. Now that you have both bolts here and your extrusion, you just want to get these to snug, no further. So you don't want to tighten them all the way. What you want is, you want to make sure it's as close to straight as you can if you're looking at it. And another way to tell is if you match with this bracket, it's pretty close to straight. And that's what's going to matter at this point. But you don't want it completely snug. You want to be able to move it just a little bit in there for when we go on and install the X gantry. So the next thing you want to do is grab your Allen wrench, and we're actually just going to back these 2 bolts off just 1 turn each. So I've already made sure they're tight. Now what I'm going to do is put the small end of the Allen wrench in and just back them 1 full turn off of each. So there's 1 on that one. And what that's going to do is it's going to loosen that guide a little bit for the Z-screw when we install it. And there's 1 full turn on that one, and you're good. Now we're going to move on to the fun part. We're going to get the X gantry together. So we're going to need what we just put together. So this is the extrusion that goes across, this is the extruder, and we just put that together. We're going to actually take our hot end now, and if you read it, it'll say Ender right up in this corner. And that is how it goes on the extrusion. So we want to make sure you're untangled here, untwist your cords and make sure that they're not tangled. And then this will actually go on just like that. And just make sure if you're looking at the front, it says Ender up here in the corner. Once we got the hot end on the extrusion here, we want to take our whole gantry and we want to go ahead and place it on the left side, just like this. So then we want to take our wrench, just like we did with the Y eccentric nut. The eccentric nut is right here. We want to loosen it till it's very loose, just so it's real loose and it wobbles a little, like this. Then we're just going to go ahead and tighten it back, just so it's tight enough that it rolls good, but these wheels aren't slipping and you can still turn them a little bit with your hands, like that. So that feels pretty good. So now we're going to take a roll of tape. You can use anything and just support that right off there so the nozzle doesn't crash. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the right side trolley that looks like this. It looks like a triangle here. And we're going to put it on with the long side facing in. So it'll go in like this. So we're going to do the same thing with the eccentric nut. The eccentric nut is right here. We're going to go ahead and loosen it way up so this wobbles on the plate. I can probably even show you a little looser. There you go. So it wobbles. Then we're just going to tighten it step by step so it stops wobbling, but so it's still loose and rolls freely. So once you got your right trolley rolling good, you can hold on to it and still turn the wheels with a little force. We're going to bring it down and we're going to set it in about the position where the X gantry comes across. But you see here, it doesn't stay because the extrusion is not touching it. So what we need to do is we need to actually twist these extrusions so it matches it up and marries that. And I'm going to change the camera angle and show you that now. So what we're going to do next is, as you see the right trolley, we have it rolling good, but it's not in line with our extrusion here. So what we need to do is we need to hold our trolley and we need to rotate the left extrusion here just so it touches, and we can rotate our right one a little bit so it lines up perfect. So you don't want to force them, but you want to rotate those two extrusions so you can see this is married up very well. Then the next step would be to take two of the M4 by 16 bolts, and we're going to go ahead and put them in. And one goes in this side of the back. You might have to hold it to start the screwing. There we go. And the other one goes in right back here in the screw hole back here. So I would hand tighten those to start. And then what I would do once you got them going is grab your Allen wrench and go ahead and tighten those up. So the next thing we're going to do is take our top extrusion, and I put the 4 M5 by 25 bolts in already. And we're going to set that on there. And what we're going to do is I'm going to get them a little hand tight here and then snug those up. So there's 4 bolts here for the top extrusion. So what we want to do is get our Allen wrench and snug those up. We're going to go ahead and do a final tighten of the bottom screws here. So I'm just going to go ahead and lay it down. So once it's laid down, we're going to do a final tighten of the 4 bolts that are underneath here. So I want to go ahead and take my Allen wrench, and we're going to use the small side and just do a final tighten to make sure they're good and tight. And we're going to do all 4. So the next thing we need is our Z stepper motor, 2 M4 by 18P bolts, our Allen wrench, and our Z rod that we had before. And this is in the protective layer still. So the first thing we're going to do here is go ahead and set our stepper motor up there, and I like to take these and put them on the end of my Allen wrench, go to tight, and then I'll back it off 2 turns. That way it's still a little loose. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is take your Z screw, pull it out of the protective cover, and we're going to raise our X gantry near the top of the machine. This is important because in a few minutes we're going to measure, and you want your X gantry near the top. So go ahead and screw down your lead screw through that guide we loosened earlier. Make sure it fits good into your coupler, and then go ahead and tighten it with the Allen wrench that came with the machine, and you can go ahead and tighten it down at this time. So now that your X gantry is being held up, you can actually spin it with the Z rod back here. It should not fall down. So we're going to take a ruler, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to measure each side. So I have 70 millimeters here, and I have almost 80 millimeters there. That means this side is quite high, and I need to fix that because it's not level. So we grab a hold like this and we pull down on this side. That should lower this a little, but you got to be careful because these wheels are still doing their job and holding everything up. So we go ahead and measure. That's 75 and 80. I'm still not even close. After I went through and adjusted this, I just used the bar here and I kind of adjusted it through. Let's see how I did. I got 90 millimeters there, and I got 90 millimeters there. What that means is we should be level or straight to the top bar, and that's what we want. If this becomes too loose where you can just go back and forth real easy, you need to take everything off, tighten these 2 screws a little bit, and then put it back together and start this process again. But this is a very important process that these need to be within 1 millimeter of each other. So after you make sure you're level here and you're straight and you're within 1 millimeter, what we're going to do is go ahead and loosen this grub screw, and I'm just going to use the small end of the Allen wrench, and we're going to just take everything off here real quick. Okay, once you got this top grub screw really loose, and I like to get it really loose so this Z-rod will slide right out, what you want to do is grab the X gantry like this and just pull straight up. And the Z-rod or Z-screw should come straight out of that coupler. And you can go ahead and unscrew it, and it should come out pretty easily. And then when we get it all the way unscrewed, we'll just set it down next to the printer. Now we're going to lower our X gantry down onto whatever you had holding it off the bed so the nozzle doesn't crash. And the next step is just to remove that top rail just like we put it on before, we're going to remove it now. So once we got the top off, we want to carefully lift the X-gantry up and off. And then we want to be careful not to crash our head here, or the nozzle. This is our nozzle under here. We don't want to crash that into anything. So what we need to do is go in and tighten the 2 screws you see here till they're fully tightened now. The best way to do that is use the small side so you don't strip anything out. If you come down like this and use the round side, a lot of times this will strip out. We don't want that to happen. So use the small side, get them nice and tight so this X-gantry doesn't move. So once we do the final tighten on those 2 bolts, what we want to do is take our X-gantry and go ahead and reinstall it onto the extrusions. So it should go on just like that, and we still should be rolling very smooth. Go ahead and rest it down like that on whatever you were supporting it off the bed with. So the next thing we're going to do is just like we did before. We want to fit our Z rod and make sure we don't need a spacer down into our coupler. So we're going to go ahead and raise that up. You can screw it down in like that. My arm is probably in the way. And then what we want to do is when we're screwing it down, we want to see if it falls in line or if it's spaced out a little bit. So in our case, I better give it a little more here. In our case, it fell right in. So if we look here, we don't have any gap. And I know it's loose because we need to do the tightening still, but what we wanted to make sure is that when we screwed it in from near the top, that it went down in there with no problems. So if it didn't go in and maybe it hit one side or the other and it just doesn't look straight, that means we may need a spacer that goes between our stepper motor and the frame here. Temporarily, to get by, you can use a washer and you can throw it between here. And then when you get your printer up and going, you can go to Thingiverse and we'll measure the gap here and print a nice spacer to go in between there. Then what we want to do is take and we want to raise it up just a little bit. There should be about a 2 millimeter gap because you don't want this sitting all the way down. So there should be about a 2 millimeter gap there. Raise it up just a little bit and then go ahead and tighten your coupler using that grub screw. That brings us to the next step of fully tightening these 2 screws right here. We put these screws in or bolts into this frame earlier, but they were still loose. So we know we're straight. We know that we went in and we just need to go ahead and use your small end to get them about snug. And then, if I can see, then you want to flip to your little end and just tighten them in. So at this point, we can put our top extrusion back on. And I don't remember if I showed you this before, but the bolts go in like this, and there's a cutout so they actually will sit flush when they're tight. So as I said before, I like to put them in so I can line them up, and then we'll go ahead and tighten those down quick too. So now that we have everything final tightened, we're going to move on to our bed. So now during this part of the build, we actually need 4 4mm nuts, and we're going to take the bed completely off and we're going to work on stabilizing it. If you don't have 4 4mm nuts at this time, that's okay. You can always come back to this part of the build after your machine is built and finish this at a later time. We got all 4 off. All we're going to do from here is I am going to lift my X-gantry up a little bit, and I'm just going to lift straight up. And all but the back spring will come out. So what you want to do here is go grab 4mm regular nuts, not lock nuts, and we're just going to screw them holding this. We're going to hold this screw from the back side here, and we're just going to screw the nut on all the way to the bed till they're tight, like that. We're going to do that for all 4. So the back one here, you got to be very careful. You don't want to disturb these wires or break any of those wires, otherwise your bed won't heat. So we're going to have to very carefully take that plastic piece off, pull your spring out, and then go ahead and put your nut on the end of that all the way up to the bed like we did here. So you have the back on, you got your 4mm nut, your spring, and your back bracket here. And you got all the other ones hand tightened up to the bed. I do not use a wrench or a pliers or anything because you could damage the surface. Just hand tighten them. Just make sure they're tight. So then what we're going to do is take our spring and put our springs back on. So I like to start with that back left. So I get the back left in there, and I put the spring down on the bed and I lower the back right down right through the spring. And then that should drop into the carriage. Then I take my front right and I put the spring in there, and I take my front left and I put the spring in there, and then I lower those down to the carriage. And now if everything dropped like it should, there we go. You should have a flat bed that should be a lot more sturdy now. What I did now was tightened all 4 of the bed screws back in. I started with the front, went halfway, put the back on, and went halfway. Came back to the front and finished up, and then went back to the back and finished. So the next thing after that is you're going to release the bed screws 4 full turns each. So what you want to do is do the fronts and then the backs. Make sure you do 4 full turns. And then after this video, you're going to want to see the bed leveling video in which we level your bed before your first print. Now take your build surface and put it back on the bed there. And we want to go ahead and lower our X gantry down. I'm using the Z screw to turn it down. You can turn it right here and it'll lower it down nicely for you. And then we want to bring and push over our hot end here just like that. And we want to drop it down. And we want to push the bed back just so the nozzle is in the front left corner. We can use the manual that came with it if you want, and we can set it down there. And we just use our Z coupler here, and we just touch off so there's just a hair, just a little bit of drag in our paper, but that's it. It's not leveling right now. We're just going to set our Z end stop. So now that we've touched off on our paper here, we're going to go ahead and install our Z end stop that came with the kit. That's what this is. Okay? You want to arrange your T-nuts there like that. So you got them straight up and down. And then they slide into the extrusion here. So we're going to slide it into that extrusion, and then we're going to slide it up until the little spring clicks. Now, in some cases, like you're seeing here, it's not going up far enough for this little tab. So this little tab here, as you can see here, is actually hitting our extrusion. So we just take our flush cuts that came with the kit, and we cut that little tab off if we need to, just like that. So then now we can realign our T-nuts. Make sure your T-nuts are in. Slide it up. So go ahead and tighten the bolts in. So at this point, I'm just going to do a quick adjustment of the eccentric nut right here. So I'm going to go ahead like we did before, and I'm going to back it off. I'm going to go ahead and loosen it so we're wobbly, just like that. Now we're really wobbly. And then I'm going to go ahead and just tighten it in just a little bit so we're not wobbly anymore, and so that you can still turn the wheels with a little bit of force, but it's still being held on nicely. Then we should be able to roll very good, and that's good to go. So the next thing we want to do is go ahead and get your belt out like this, and The textured side right here, that's going to go down. And we're going to put it through the left side. We're going to go ahead and run it around the little gear there and then back in. So once you get it fed through like this, I'm going to go ahead and change camera angles to show you how to hook it into the X carriage. So once you got your belt looped around the gear, you want to bring it up like this, and there's a little tab here, and you just want to stick your belt in, and the metal part will face down when it loops in. And that'll connect your belt, there we go, into the X carriage right there. Now take your roller bearing that came in the package, has the pulley on it here with the bearing and the 2 T-nuts. Place them into the extrusion here and go ahead and tighten those on. Not all the way tight, just loose so you can still move it. So once you got that attached, what you want to do is go ahead and take your belt, run it underneath like this, down around, there you go, down around that bearing, and attach it to the other side just like we did the first time. So the first time I did this, you can see I actually ran the belt wrong here. I couldn't get the other side in because it was too tight. I went back and looked at this pulley and I realized that this is going down where it should be going around that pulley. So we need to fix that quick. So what you need to do is just make sure that the belt here is going directly around this pulley. It doesn't go anywhere else out here, and then you'll be good. So once you've got your belt on the carriage on both sides, we're going to go ahead and we're going to tighten the belt tensioner here on the right side. So grab a hold of the belt tensioner and with your right hand, pull it as tight as you can with one hand. Then you want to take your left hand and go ahead and tighten the left screw. Okay, now that we've pulled this tight and we've tightened the left screw, we want to go ahead and we want to run this back and forth and make sure your belt is running true in the center of the extrusion. It's not hitting one side or the other. If it is hitting one side or the other, you may need to put a small shim between the bracket and the extrusion right here. And what you would do is you would take these out, you put a small washer between here and put them back, and that would pull the head of your tensioner just a little bit back this way, and it would make them run true in the center. It looks like we're okay, so we're going to go ahead and do our final tighten on the right screw now. So now we're all tightened up, and just to double check, you should hear a twang when you're completely tight. So we're almost done now. So the next things we need to do is go ahead and plug in all of our power connectors. So we're going to start down here with the Z end stop, and all of the connectors, they can only go in one way. So there's your Z end stop. We're going to go ahead and push that in just like that. Okay, so we're going to go to the side now. The first thing we're going to do is this stepper motor right here, which is our Z stepper motor. And that's just a little cable that comes right out of the back here. Then we're going to take the ribbon cable that has 3, like this. And we're going to go ahead and plug in the extruder first, which has an E on it. So there's that one. Then we're going to take this one right here for the X Gantry stepper motor. And we're going to plug it straight in, just like that. So that goes up in there, just to make sure it's tight. And then we're going to take the X end stop here, and it goes little tabs facing outwards. So we're just going to go ahead and slide that in and use your finger to tighten it in. Okay, from here we only have one left. We're going to go ahead and push this forward a little, and we're just going to connect the 2 yellow connectors here, just like that. So they're pushed together nice and tight. And then those are going to go underneath like this. So we are just one step away from being able to power this bad boy up and see what she can do. But first, what we need to do is check out and make sure that the Bowden tube here, which is the white tube, is all the way down into our hot end. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our wrench that came with the kit and set it right there. We're going to take our flush cuts here and we're going to go ahead and snip the 3 zip ties that hold the Bowden tube, which is the white tube here, to the power cables here. So we snipped those now. Now we take our wrench that came with the kit and we go ahead and we slowly loosen and then take out our Bowden coupler out of the hot end here. It should screw all the way out and look like this. So a lot of times how these work is you can push them in, but you can't pull them backwards because there's a coupler here that locks them in. And even if you pull that coupler back, a lot of times you can't get the Bowden tube out. So we advise just to go ahead and push it forward just like this, and it'll come right out like that. So at this time, go ahead and plug in your Ender 3, and we're gonna go ahead and turn it on. So the screen booted up, I hear fans running, and it sounds like we're good. We wanna go ahead and get the hot end warmed up so we can put that PTFE tubing back in. So go ahead and click the button, go down to Control, click the button, scroll down to Temperature, click the button, scroll down to Nozzle, and we're going to dial that up all the way to about 200 degrees and click it. So I'm going to go back to my main screen, and now we're going to make sure that we can see the hot end heating up on the temperature here. So while that was heating up, I took the PTFE tubing and I measured up 2 inches. And I took a permanent marker and I made a mark on the tube right there. The next thing you want to do, it's now to temperature at 200 degrees Celsius. And we're going to go ahead and screw our Bowden tube back into the top of the cooling block, or the whole thing is called the hot end here. And we're going to screw it in till it's finger tight. Then what we want to do is back it off 3/4 of a turn with your wrench. We want to take your PTFE tube and we want to insert it as far as you can into the top here. So as far as you can go. And word of advice, hold from the sides. Be careful from the fan on this side. And you don't want to hold from underneath because your nozzle is very hot. So be very careful when you're pushing this down. You don't want to burn your fingers. So you want to go ahead and push that all the way down as far as it goes, and you'll see our little mark there. Go ahead and do the final tighten. So now what we have is a mark, so you know if this ever comes up that your PTFE tube is pulling away from your coupler. So the next thing we want to do is take the other end of the PTFE tube and do the same thing. Push it all the way in as far as it goes and make sure it's all the way in, and then pull that coupler back. In the beginning of the video, we found these 2 locking clips in one of the bags, and this is what they're going to be used for. There's 2 sizes, so the small one is going to go ahead and clip on right there. So the big one will go ahead and clip underneath that collar right there, and both those locking clips are in place, and that should keep your Bowden tube from slipping too much. So the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and attach our build surface with the clips that came with it. But first I want to make sure that you guys know that we don't want to move any of the axes front to back, up to down, side to side. So our X, Y, Z axes, we don't want to move those without disabling the steppers first. So you click the button, you go to Prepare, scroll down to Disable Steppers, and that will disable the stepper motors. That way you can move them without worrying that they're still engaged. So we are just about home free. We're just going to go ahead and add the 4 clips to our build surface here so we know that it's strong and it's not going somewhere. And we're going to do 2 in the front, and then I like to do 2 in the rear, but closer to the center, like that. So the next thing we did is we went ahead and we turned on the heat bed to make sure it's going to heat up for us. So I clicked the button, I went down to control, I went down to temperature, I went to bed, I went up to 60 degrees and I hit the button again, and then I just went backwards to the main screen and to the info screen to watch. And we should see our bed heating up now too. And I can feel it, it's getting warm. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is grab the plastic end caps. They're squares, look like this, and we're going to push them in the top extrusion on the ends. And just make sure they're tight in there, and that just kind of cleans it up on the ends. Perfect. Then what we want to do is take our filament holder, and we've put 2 M5 by 8 bolts and 2 M5 T-nuts in the end of there. And you want to make sure they're just lined up straight here, and then they sit right into the top extrusion, something like that. Perfect. And I like to push mine all the way to the left against that bolt. Oops, sorry. And then I'm going to grab the Allen wrench and just tighten those down so they're good and snug, and then I'm going to go ahead and flip it to the small side to finish the tightening. So we'll just get it in there and finish up the tightening. And then we're going to take the filament spool holder there and put it through the hole. Take the lock nut that came with the kit and lock it on. Perfect. Now grab the wire loom that's hanging from the back and push it into the clip in the back of the extruder. And that gets that out of the way. And then we want to go ahead and auto home our 3D printer. And when you auto home, what that does, it's going to go ahead and check all of the end stops and the stepper motors for us, and that's what we're going to do it for now. So go ahead and click the button, scroll down to prepare, click the button again, scroll down to auto home, and then when you hit that button, it'll start. So it hit the X end stop, now it'll slide back and hit the Y end stop, and it'll lower now to hit that Z end stop. Something to note that the Ender 3 does is that it pushes that plate back. That way, when the nozzle comes down, it's in the front left of the machine, and the nozzle will not hit your build plate, which is great. Now, as it lowers, you want to be careful and keep your hand by the power button, because if the Z end stop doesn't work, your X gantry could crash and hit the bed, which is bad. You'll know if that happens, it'll make a loud noise. In our case, we seem to be moving pretty smoothly and pretty good, and I think we're going to be okay. So as it goes down, it does take a while depending on how high your X gantry was up there. But once it bounces off that Z end stop, we'll know our build is good. So now that your Ender 3 is completely built, we've gone through everything, we've turned it on, we've auto-homed it, and it's good to go. But let's go through some quick terminology. So this right here, this is your hot end. This back here, this is your extruder. This is where the filament comes in. It gets fed through the Bowden tube here, down through the hot end, and out of the nozzle. This is your build surface. This whole thing together is your bed. This right here is your screen. This is your control knob. This is your filament holder. This all together here is your X gantry. That's your X gantry there. Your power supply is back here. That's what you plug into and you turn on to power up the Ender 3. Your motherboard sits underneath of this plate here. This right here is your Z end stop. We installed that during the video. This right here is your X end stop. And there's a Y end stop in the back here. As we talked about, this right here is your Z screw here. This right here is your Z coupler. This is your Z stepper motor. So now that we went over that, I think you have a really good start. So if you ever need to go onto the forums, there's a bunch of Ender 3 forums and there's some Creality official forums. You have a great start and you should know what each thing is called. If you ever have questions, feel free to ask. So there you go. You've successfully built a Creality Ender 3 using Luke Hatfield's Performance Assembly Guide. I know that straight out of the box, because you took the extra time to go through these steps, you're going to get a more stable and a better performing Ender 3, and it's going to be awesome. The only thing you need to do now is go look at my bed leveling video, get your bed nice and level, and then let's get printing. I hope you guys had a great time today. I hope you learned something, and as always, keep printing. So thank you again to Luke for letting me film this. Thanks again to Creality for sending me the Ender 3 so I can put it together today for you. If you liked the video, please click the like button. If you want to see more, click the subscribe button below. And if you want to get notifications when I put the next great video out, click the little bell. We'll see you next time.